Welcome back, my friends. I am so thankful that you are hanging with me in this series. This is episode 9 of the Sovereignty series, and we've been exploring this word because it's the word that I chose for my 2026 word of the year. And let me tell you, it's been a journey, and it actually is queuing up our whole next series. Um, that is going to take me through a pretty significant life change. Lots to update you on with that. And I'm hopeful that whoever is listening to these episodes is relating in some way to the things that you're going through in life. And that's what it's all about. It's facing life changes. It's facing life challenges. It's facing our fear and knowing we're not alone in how we manage and what tools do we have to be able to get through some of the things in life and not just get through them and not just survive, but come out the other side to me with a pocket full of wisdom, a pocket full of things that we can offer to other people, experiences that taught us something, that we use them to heal and to transform and to grow. That is the way I like to live my life. And I'm inviting you to do the same. So, this sovereignty series, we are on episode 9. So, you are welcome to binge on with Love Jenny sovereignty series if you'd like to. But if not, I think each episode it really does kind of stand alone. It's really been broken down into the pieces of when I started even researching what's it mean to live a sovereign life? What's our sovereignty like? It's like in your car, are my fuel gauges, all my gauges, is everything right? Is it in alignment? Are the tires inflated? Is the oil good? Is the gasoline gauge good? Is the battery operating or whatever kind of car you drive? We always are checking those gauges. Well, sovereignty to me is just that. It's an internal check and balance. Am I living my truth? Am I operating under a awareness, an awakening, a consciousness to what is happening around me in my life? Am I falling into default patterns? Am I prey to my old belief systems that no longer serve me? Falling into what are actual lies that say, I'm not enough or whatever. That's my default. And if I'm not aware, I'm creating old patterns and I'll get old results. So when we want to look at growth, which means we're going to change something or improve something, we really have to get ourselves in check, into alignment to make it through that change. To change the default system, that's pretty tough to do. And that's what sovereignty invites us to look at. So I've been thinking about this particular episode for weeks. And I think if you listen to all of them, I might have at one point said that I thought it was going to be a 12 episode series, which was quite a long series. But, they each have their own distinct insight that I know sovereignty opened the door, but I found so much inside after I walked through that door. And so after doing this one, um, I am going to close out my sovereignty series. I think that it kind of wrapped it up for me, and I think it will for you too. But I'm also going to invite you to put on your thinking cap. Put on, take a walk. If you're sitting, I don't want to bore you. I'll try to keep it interesting so you don't fall asleep on this one. Wow. And even talking to you right now, I can feel my throat chakra. That place where you get a lump in your throat? Which is a little bit of trapped energy. And I can feel that speaking this one out loud is really going to be a breakthrough for me. So let's dive in. All right. Let's just quit talking about it and dancing around the fire. Let's walk across the hot coals. So yeah, I've been thinking about this one for a while. And I realized I think as I was asking myself about it, I was actually not asking the best question. The last 8 episodes has been talking about becoming a sovereign woman. And we've talked about self abandonment, we've talked about boundaries, our values, how and who makes choices in our life. We've talked about how to become her, all of these beautiful conversations that help us move toward the woman we were created to be, or the man that we were created to be. But the more that I prayed and journaled and thought and contemplated and studied and researched and actually just lived my own life over these past few months of this series, the more one question kept coming back to me. What if we don't become sovereign? What if we already are? What if sovereignty isn't something we earn? I didn't really ever believe that, I don't think. What if it isn't something that we achieve after we've healed enough or read enough books or taken enough classes or attended enough retreats or just finally figured life out, right? What if sovereignty is just in our natural state? What if it's the place that we are supposed to be in the first place if we just didn't complicate life so much? And if that's true, then the question isn't, how do I become sovereign? The question becomes, why do I keep leaving my sovereignty? Now, when I say that, I don't mean leaving God or source or whatever it is you call your higher power. I don't believe that our life force, our source, our God would ever have left us. I don't believe there's separation. I don't believe love has ever withdrawn itself from us. I think it's at the core of each one of us. I don't believe that God disconnects from us because we make mistakes or we lose our way. I think we disconnect from source. I think that's how it happens. I think we disconnect in our own awareness of it. We forget. We forget that we're not just doing this out here alone. We forget that we're not alone in our own thoughts, that nobody else can hear our thoughts. Nobody else out there knows what any one of us is thinking, which makes it feel like we're alone. But I don't believe we are. I believe that within there is our consciousness that belongs to a higher consciousness. It's a fractal of a higher consciousness, of Christ consciousness. But we forget that. And then we become hypnotized by the appearance that we put in front of us, in front of others. We begin believing what our eyes can see more than what our soul actually knows. And, the physical world, the 3D world, it does give us evidence that we experience with all 5 of our senses, right? But there's a sixth sense and even another sense that's out there that is actually not out there. It's in here. It's within us. It's what our soul came here knowing. It's that inner voice that whispers and sometimes screams, and it's easy to ignore. And pretty soon, when we start doing that, we start believing our circumstances out here more than the authority of truth within us. And that, I believe, is where self-abandonment begins. It's not with a bad decision. It's not when we enter into a toxic relationship. It's not saying yes when we mean no. Those are just symptoms. Self-abandonment begins when we forget who we are. The moment we forget that we belong to something greater than ourselves. And that's a big concept to contemplate. And in spirituality, versus religion, and religion, they will talk about, they will name it God, Yahweh, Christ. Um, Others, you know, have other names that I can't recall right now, but all religions believe there's something more. The Native Americans, looked to the sky, to the trees, to Mother Earth, that we belong to something greater that created all of this. Think about it. When you look outside your window, who created all this? What's the design of this crazy plan, right? And I think that that source, that God, gave us humans free will and an ability to come here wanting to show what we can create, show that through spiritual law, spiritual truth, universal laws, through principles of never forgetting who we are and living our truth and creating from possibilities, from a God who is omnipotent, gives us the ability to let us become that expression of the divinity, of the divine creation itself, right? I am getting very philosophical on my soapbox, so I'm going to try to keep making this simple and bring it into everyday life. So I started asking another question. Why do we repeat the same patterns over and over? Why do we fill our savings account and then drain it again? Why do we attract the same relationship that doesn't work out? Why do we, get the same boss in three different jobs? Why does one woman marry three different men who all somehow feel exactly the same to her? And why does another woman keep finding herself working in a job she hates? And why does someone finally leave a controlling relationship only to find themselves in another one a few years later? Why does one person always seem to struggle with their money no matter how much they earn or even have? Why do people repeatedly sabotage opportunities they've prayed for? Why? Are they unlucky? Are they broken? Or is something else happening? And I contemplate this a lot in my own life. I look at, here's my pattern. And if I want to change this pattern, what how does that even happen? What is creating it? Years ago, when I first began studying New Thought, ancient wisdom, when I started studying spiritual psychology and universal law, one idea in there actually stopped me in my tracks. Life reflects consciousness. And I contemplated on this concept. Let me say it again. Life reflects our consciousness. Well, at first, I kind of loved the idea, but then I really resisted it, because if my consciousness is creating the experience I'm having, then suddenly I couldn't spend my life pointing my finger at everything or everyone else. There's no victims here at all. And that made me really curious. And you can imagine where my mind went and probably where your mind is going. Well, why would someone choose to suffer? Why would someone choose to get a disease? Why would someone choose to have a violent experience? So I had to get really curious. And that is, instead of judging the concept, I contemplated it and I got curious about it. What if my life, and the parts that felt like they weren't working out? What if life wasn't punishing me for something I did sometime that I don't even know what it is? What if there isn't a God that created us but actually punishes us um, without us understanding why? What if the experience I'm having is revealing something to me? What if all of it is revealing the parts of me I've forgotten? So now, before you decide I've completely lost my mind, stay with me just for another minute. I want you to really think about this. I'm not here to change your beliefs. I'm not here to change your identity or your religious and spiritual practices. Not at all. I just want to contemplate this with you. Um, if I wanted to know what you truly believe about relationships, and this comes up a lot when I'm working with people and my practice as a coach, as a spiritual psychology practitioner. If I want to know what you believe about relationships, I wouldn't ask you that question because you'd tell me that what you hope is true about your belief about relationships. You'd tell me what you've learned. You'd tell me what you've read. You'd tell me what you aspire to. But instead, if I just simply looked at your relationships, if I wanted to know what you really believe about your relationship, I'd look at what's showing up in your relationship. If I wanted to know what you believed about money, I wouldn't ask you what affirmations you've written on the bathroom mirror. I'd look at your financial life. If I wanted to know what you believe about your own worth, I'd watch what you tolerate and how you let others treat you, what you apologize for, or what you allow, who you become when you're around certain people. Have you ever noticed that about someone? I have somebody in my life, and I won't say who, but it's a he, and you can guess because there's lots of boys and men in my family, brothers and sons and husband. And one of them will talk to me in Jenny speak, I'd say. But the minute he's with another kind of group of men, his language even changes. And I'm like, why are you talking that way? What are you doing? And so it's like he becomes someone else when he's around certain people. I don't know if you've ever experienced that with anyone, but I've noticed it. And then it makes me get conscious because if life is a feedback loop, I have to look at, well, in what ways do I do that? Another question: how often do you betray your own knowing just to avoid disappointing someone else? Oh, that one's so big for me. So, our lives are constantly giving us clues, right? They're like a printout from our subconscious mind. Not all these things are consciously happening. We don't consciously choose to get sick or to have a car accident or to, come across bankruptcy or have any of these devastating events in our life. They're not conscious, they're subconscious patterns, but they're not showing us everything that we've ever thought. They're showing us what we've consistently believed deeply enough to organize our lives around it. It's like it's a belief is like this strong concept, and our life organizes around it, and it's like a pillar of how we think and how we see the world, who we see ourselves as in this world, right? One question I ask my clients, it's all the time, is what keeps repeating itself? Not what happened once, but what keeps repeating itself when you say things like, it never works out. never implies a pattern or this always happens to me. Never or always. Notice them in your language when you're calling, your friend and, oh, that always happens to me too. Well, there you go. There's a perfect printout from your subconscious mind of a belief that that's what's going to happen to you. Patterns fascinate me. I got even more curious because you know why? Patterns don't lie. The name might change, the face might change, the city might change, the job might change, your circumstances can change, but the lesson is going to keep showing up. And I used to say, please let me learn before it happens again, because I don't wake up to my subconscious screaming at me until it's like the universe hits me upside the head with a 2x4, right? All these things keep changing, but the pattern stays the same. The lesson waits until we're finally willing to see it and take responsibility for it. And I don't think life does that because it's cruel to us. I think life is incredibly compassionate. I think God is incredibly patient. And I think life itself is always trying to wake us up, not to shame us, but wake us up, because consciousness cannot transform what consciousness refuses to acknowledge. I'm going to say that again. Consciousness cannot transform what consciousness refuses to acknowledge. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to identify everyone else's patterns, and yet we can't see our own? Sometimes we can actually see it in others within minutes. You always call and tell me this, or why are you always calling and telling me the same sad story? But you refuse to acknowledge it exists, and therefore you are not going to be able to stop the pattern of suffering. But then they can take decades before we recognize it in our own life, our own patterns. So I want to challenge you right now to get out a pen and paper and actually write down. When it comes to my relationships, I always put myself last. When it comes to relationships, I always compromise myself in order not to disappoint someone. When it comes to friendships, I'm always the people pleaser. When it comes to, relationship with my mom, I always tolerate the way she treats me, the way she speaks to me, whatever it looks like. Why do we do that? Look at your life. When do I never? When it comes to money, I never have enough. When it comes to my money, I never feel secure. When it comes to money, I never have enough at the end of the month. When it comes to money, I always rely on my credit card to see me through. Those are patterns in relationship to your money. When it comes to my well-being, to my health and wellness, I always know I should take a walk, but I never do it. These are all patterns, you guys. So look at those categories in your life. Why are they there? And I'll answer it in one word. It's because they are familiar. 2 words. They're comfortable. They're woven into the stories that we've told ourselves about who we are. They've become our identity. The stories become our identity. And the beliefs become so familiar that they become patterns. So things like, I have to work harder than everyone else. People always leave me. I have to earn love. It's not safe to be seen. I can't trust people. I can't trust life. there isn't enough. There isn't enough time. There isn't enough money. There isn't enough energy. There isn't enough love. I'm too much. I'm not enough. And I got to tell you that no one just wakes up one morning and decides to believe all those things. Somewhere along the way, life happened. Someone said that to you. Something painful occurred that made you believe that. You put meaning on an experience, and that meaning then became a belief, which became your identity. And what began as protection, well, slowly became your identity. Okay? Your beliefs then set expectations in life, and expectations form a perception. And the perception then creates the experience. And eventually, the experience is evidence. See, I knew it. I knew people couldn't be trusted. I knew I wasn't going to be enough. I knew success never lasts. I knew this relationship would get hard. What if we weren't collecting evidence? What if we were creating it? I'm going to say that again, you guys. What if we weren't collecting evidence and being right about life itself or who we are in relation to life and the circumstances around us? What if those beliefs were actually the ones creating it? Now, I know that's a bold statement. It might even be uncomfortable because we have to then take responsibility. Back in 2000, Bob and I took a leadership course here in North Carolina called the Legacy Journey. And they said you are 100% responsible, period. You are 100% responsible. And I had trouble with it. It's like, well, I'm not responsible for what's going on across the world, in the Middle East. I'm not responsible for gas prices going up. I'm not responsible for weather, right? But what if consciousness is that creative? And what if universal law is operating, whether or not we're aware of it? And if that's true, then maybe our lives are less random than we've been taught to believe. Maybe every recurring pattern is literally an invitation to ask, what am I believing that I have never questioned? Not because we should blame ourselves. Please hear me. This is not about blaming ourselves for bad things happening or wars starting or gas prices. It's not about that. Because blame has never transformed anyone. It's really never done anything to empower us. As a matter of fact, it's just the opposite. It's the polarity. But you know what does transform us, and you know what does empower us? Responsibility. Being 100% responsible. Responsible to say, if my consciousness participated in creating this pattern, then my consciousness can participate in creating something new. And perhaps it's whatever created a problem can now create the solution to the problem. Do you hear the difference? One of those, by blaming us, it takes our power away. And taking responsibility for what shows up in our life hands that power right back to us. And sovereignty has everything to do with that. It's not power over other people. It's not about control or domination. But it's a gift we are given as human beings. And to my knowledge, perhaps short of possibly some sea life, we're the only ones consciously aware that we've been given free will. We've been given the power to become conscious of our thoughts. We've been given the power to choose what we think and what we believe. We have the power to stop living by default. We have the power to remember truth when whatever is showing up externally is shouting something completely different. And I think that's why the universal laws matter so much. When I started studying the universal laws, which really there's only one true universal law, and that is the law of cause and effect. And the law of cause and effect says, I'm the cause of this effect, not to take the blame of whatever is in the external entire world, but to understand I am a part of it. And when one person shifts, everything shifts. If you study physics and universal law, if I shift my consciousness to a different belief, there's a chain reaction that happens. And if enough of us shift that belief, it becomes part of the collective consciousness. And when the collective consciousness expands to a tipping point, we shift to world peace, or we shift to prosperity. We bring heaven to earth in that way, if enough of us believe that way. So I think that's why universal law matters so much. But it's not because the laws are just interesting philosophy, which they started out that way for me. And they're not just ancient teachings, and they're not just here to make us sound all spiritual. It's because they describe the way that life works. Whether or not I believe in gravity, if I step off a roof, gravity is still going to do what gravity does, right? Not because gravity is angry with me and not because gravity wants to teach me a lesson. It's simply gravity is expressing its nature. And I believe spiritual law works much the same way. It isn't rewarding us or punishing us, it's faithfully reflecting our consciousness. And once I understood that, everything changed because I stopped asking, why is this happening to me? And I began asking a much more interesting question. What is life teaching me? What if this challenge isn't standing in my way? What if it's pointing the way? What if the relationship that keeps breaking my heart isn't simply about the relationship? What if the financial struggle isn't really about money? Huh. What if the conflict with your adult child isn't about your adult child at all? And what if anxiety isn't really about my circumstance? What if every one of those experiences is just asking me one question? What are you believing that isn't true? Mm. What are you believing that isn't true? Now, I could say, all right, all right, I hear your thoughts out there, okay? Because they are mine too. I will tell you, I stay in a lot of contemplation around this. I want to be spiritually grounded. I want to believe in manifestation. I want to believe that we were born to be creative by nature, that our soul came to heal and to transform and to grow through a creative process, right? So if I want to heal and transform and grow through a creative process, and that is reflected in my bank account, and I believe all of that, call it hocus pocus, whatever, woo woo, whatever you want to call it. If we believe all that, then why is my checking account overdrawn? Why is that happening? If I am to take full responsibility, then I would not ask, well, something in me doesn't believe I'm worth it. Maybe. But the bigger question is, what am I believing that isn't true? That I have not only no value, but I'm taking up good oxygen by being here on the planet. I'm going out in a deficit. That's what's showing me. Life is showing me that I might believe that about myself. Not consciously. I'm not consciously trying to say something about myself that's bad. I know better. But in my subconscious mind, I promise you, buried deep inside that subconscious mind is a belief, probably from before the beginning of time or the beginning of your life, where you placed meaning on some event that happened or something that someone said that made you think that you had little value. Not because somebody was cruel or intentional about it, but because you might have been there and intercepted a really unfortunate moment in their life where they weren't at their best. And we hung on to it for dear life. And we made that thought, that meaning, into something that was true when indeed it was a lie. And because we made it true and we have lived it tucked in our subconscious mind for decades, it's become a belief, a hidden belief based on a lie that sabotages us. Mm. Here's where people sometimes misunderstand new thought, which is what I'm talking about. I'm not I'm not saying that once you get this, painful things don't happen. I'm not saying we don't experience grief or illness or betrayal or disappointment. We do, because we are human and we came to experience all of life. We cannot create and expand and grow without polarity. We can't do it. So we experience joy and we experience sorrow. We experience victory and we can experience defeat, love and loss. It's all part of the human experience. We are human and being. Human has the human experience that's often built in a structure of man-made lies based on meaning we put on something that had no intention of us putting meaning on it, and maybe it did. Maybe it did, which is generational pain and shame passed one generation to the next. When you do things like that, shame on you. People literally put shame on us, and we believe we're shameful. That's part of being human, is that we believe what we're told. But the truth is, we've never been more pure and innocent as when we came into the world. And before we know it, before the age of 5 to 7, we have adopted a whole lot of limiting beliefs. And they're buried in our subconscious mind. So how in the world are we supposed to heal? You might be asking, if they're in our subconscious mind, they're not in our consciousness. How in the world do we know what to do with them? And that is when you look for your patterns. They show up in the blueprint of your life. So we go into our history, to our always and our nevers. We do consciousness, raising yourself in consciousness, asking consciousness, bring forward from subconscious thought these patterns. Bring into consciousness something not working in our life. That is where spiritual psychology and trauma coaching comes in, using the E4 trauma method that Dr. Aaron Haskell created. That's what we do. We extract it pretty painlessly. I do believe you have to feel it to heal it, but it's quick. If you go in and get it, it's quick and it's easy, and we release it from not only our experience, but from our nervous system. Trauma lives there, right? But I also believe something else, and I believe every single experience that we encounter carries with it an invitation. Every single one. If you don't believe any of this, maybe you can get to this point. If every experience we encounter invites us into it, not just to survive it, but an invitation to awaken to something more deep, more meaningful, more true, and then become conscious because of that. It allows us to remember something we forgot. And that's why I don't believe polarity is some fatal mistake in the plan. I think polarity is built into creation. Think about nature for a minute. We have day and we have night. We have high tide, we have low tide. We have winter and we have summer, spring and fall, birth and death. We inhale, we exhale. There's expansion, there's contraction. When we're pregnant, when I'm having a child, learning the muscles have to contract to push the baby out. Everything there has to expand to make room. Our hips have to expand. And we were created for that. We were created for the contraction and the expansion, for that polarity, for creation to come into form. So why would we expect our own spiritual growth to be any different? So maybe we've been interpreting polarity all wrong by judging it. Maybe the difficulty isn't evidence that we're off the path. Maybe it's evidence that we've reached the edge of our current level of consciousness. We've gone as far as we can go, and now we have to revisit our belief systems, our support structure, and say, where is it that I need to grow? What needs to be revealed to me? Think back to a time when you learned something and it changed your life. Maybe it was when first became a parent. Maybe you were walking through a divorce. Maybe you lost someone you loved. When life called you forward and threw you right into the darkness. Maybe you were recovering from addiction. Maybe it was when you started a new business. Maybe it was saying goodbye to a dream that no longer fit. Think about that. Did any of those moments happen to you without discomfort? Probably not. Growth stretches us. Growth sometimes is pretty harsh. Expansion, it stretches us to capacity sometimes. Love stretches us. Forgiveness, it stretches us. Even joy can stretch us. Every new level of consciousness asks us to release an old way of seeing ourselves. And honestly, that can often feel a little bit like dying. Not physically, but letting our ego die. The old identity crumbles. The stories we've lived inside, well, we get tired of them. I got sick and tired of being sick and tired of telling the same story to people when they would ask me how I was doing. There was a time in my life where I didn't want to lie because I don't do that very well, but I was sick and tired of my same story. And I started thinking ahead of time, what am I going to say when people ask me how I'm doing? And I had to start creating a new story that I could believe that was true, but didn't repeat the same sad story. Do you have someone who, when you pick up the phone and call them, they're telling you that same story again and again and again, and you just want to say, can we get past this? Can we just get over it? They talk about the same breakup that happened 2 decades ago while they're in a new relationship, but they're harping on it. Don't they get sick and tired of that same old sick and tired story? And it's like beating a dead horse. Is that a terrible expression? But it is like that. But those stories, they've lived inside us for so long that we don't know who we are without them. But I'll tell you, those excuses, well, they stop working for us. The blame stops satisfying us. So we keep telling it, hoping it'll change. The victim story begins to fall apart. And for a little while, we don't quite know who we are anymore because those stories formed our identity. And I think that's why so many people turn back to them, not because they're incapable of growing, but because that unfamiliar that's ahead of them, it feels vulnerable and sometimes dangerous. And the subconscious mind, well, it has one primary job: keep you alive. Your nervous system scans for danger 24/7. And it doesn't care if you feel fulfilled. It doesn't care if you're living your life on purpose. It doesn't care if you're expressing your highest potential. It wants the familiar, even if the familiar keeps hurting us over and over, even if familiar is lonely, even if familiar is unhealthy, even if familiar feels safe. That's why people can leave an unhealthy relationship and find themselves attracted to someone remarkably similar. The face changed, but your consciousness, well, it didn't. The job changed, but your consciousness didn't. The city changed, but your consciousness didn't. And until consciousness changes, that printout, it just stays remarkably similar in repeating patterns. That's often why I tell my clients that your life is one of the most honest teachers you will ever have. When I come upon something that terrifies me and I'm on the edge again of probably one of the most uncertain chapters of my life. And I just view it as both an adventure, because that makes me feel kind of excited about it. But I also recognize it, if I'm being honest, as a master class. I came here to enroll in one master class after another. And if you've been listening to this podcast, that's really what it's about. It's about learning from life. Life, it doesn't argue, it doesn't criticize, it just simply reflects back to us is in our own consciousness. If you ever stood in front of the mirror and gotten angry about how you looked and said, I'm really angry at that mirror. It's making me look bad today. You don't say that. You don't blame the mirror. The mirror simply reveals what's already there. And life functions much the same way. The mirror is not your enemy. The relationship isn't here to punish you. The money, it isn't here to punish you. The diagnosis, it isn't punishing you like you did something bad or wrong. They're all just mirrors asking one beautiful question: would you like to see something? That's a completely different conversation than asking, why is God doing this to me? Or why is the universe against me? Or why does this always happen to me? Instead, sovereignty invites us to pause, to breathe, to get curious and say, what am I being invited to look at within myself? And here's where it becomes incredibly practical because awareness alone doesn't transform us. Choice is what does the job. You can become aware that you're people pleasing and continue to people please. You can become aware that you're afraid of conflict and can continue to avoid every difficult conversation. And you can become aware that you're trying to rescue everyone and continue to exhaust yourself. Awareness opens the door, but choice is what walks through it. And that's where our free will comes in. That is where we as human beings are created differently. We are not created to be robots. I don't even know if AI can duplicate free choice, free will. But if we were, if we were created to be robots, then there would be no love. Because love requires freedom, growth requires freedom, expansion requires freedom. And we're given this incredible gift of free will to choose. The point at every circumstance, every choice we make is creating something. It's creating something down the road that we haven't even considered until we're there. But you can sure backtrack and say, man, if I had just chosen one thing differently that day, it would have changed my whole life. Every single day, every single conversation, every single relationship, every single hardship, challenge, the choice isn't whether polarity will show up, because it will. The choice is who we become when it does. Do we become smaller or wiser? Do we become more fearful or more loving, more controlling or more trusting? Do we become more unconscious or more awakened? I don't believe sovereignty means we never get afraid. I get afraid. You get afraid. Every human gets afraid. Fear is just a part of being a human being. The question is, who gets the final vote? Does your fear get to decide, or does truth? And maybe that's the simplest definition of sovereignty, is giving truth the final vote. Giving truth the final vote. And then we ask, how do we know what's true? And that's the question, right? Because if I'm asking you to tell the truth and let truth have the final vote, then we probably ought to know what truth is. Not your truth and not my truth and not your mother's truth and not your political party's truth and not what social media is telling you this week. I'm talking about spiritual truth. Truth that doesn't change because circumstances change. Truth that doesn't disappear because you're having a difficult day. Truth that remains true whether you believe it or not. Think about gravity. Let's go back to that. You don't create gravity, you discover it. You learn, and you learn to cooperate with it. And if you ignore it, then gravity doesn't become offended. It doesn't continue not being gravity. It just stays true. It stays gravity. And I believe spiritual truth works the same way. You can't rock it. You can't disarm it. You don't even invent it or create it. We just awaken to it. And over the years, every spiritual tradition that I've studied has used different language, but they all point toward the same mountain. And there's something greater than our individual personality, than our individual consciousness. Yes, we have an individual consciousness, but there's an intelligence that is within us, that is outside of us. And that consciousness is always creating. And there is an order to life. And there are principles that operate whether we're conscious of them or not. I think the first law of heaven is order. And how well do we organize and put our thoughts in order and live our life that way? How do we live a sovereign life? There's something within each of us that already knows all this. And we might call it our inner wisdom or higher self or Christ consciousness or the Buddha nature. We call it spirit. The name doesn't matter. It's the experience. Because once you've experienced it, well, you know those moments when you just know. You don't know how you know. You just know. Then you talk yourself out of it. Have you ever done that? Because I have. You feel that nudge and you don't say yes. But you do. You take the class, but you wait. You make the phone call, but you procrastinate. We do all of it. Sometimes we walk away, and then sometimes we stay. We try to control everything. We've all done this. And here's what's fascinating. No matter what spiritual background or no matter what you believe, we've all experienced this. It's what we have that unites us. It's part of humanity's collective consciousness. Here's what I know is we didn't We didn't do this because we didn't trust what we knew. It's because another voice got louder. If we all have this knowing, and we even start to act on this knowing, and then something stops us and says, oh, but wait. And we look at our bank account that's maybe overdrawn, but we really were sure about this decision for an investment or for an act of generosity. What steps in? What do we believe? Do we believe that if we gave our last penny through an act of generosity, do we believe the universal law of reciprocity means it's going to come back tenfold? Or do we let fear and scarcity make the choice? Or approval or control make the choice? Or perfectionism make the choice? Or people pleasing? Or the voice of our wound? And here's what I've come to believe. Every act of self-abandonment begins when we give authority to fear over truth. That's it. That's this whole episode. That's this whole thing I've been talking about. We don't abandon ourselves because we're weak. We don't do it because we're broken. We abandon ourselves because for a moment, we believed fear more than we believe truth or God. Think about that. People pleasing says if they don't like me, I won't be okay. But is that a spiritual truth? No. Codependency says I'm responsible for someone else's happiness. Is that a spiritual truth? No. Perfectionism, if I get everything right, then I'll finally be worthy. Is that a spiritual truth? No. Why do we operate under all these conditions that aren't even true? Scarcity says there isn't enough. It's not a spiritual truth. Control says if I don't hold everything together, it's going to all fall apart. Is that a spiritual truth? No. Do you see what just happened? Every one of those is an example of a lie. Not because those things are evil, because they're incomplete. They're conclusions we reached while trying to make sense out of our life. And usually we did that as children. Sometimes after trauma, sometimes after heartbreak, abandonment, a grandparent dies, a parent leaves. Sometimes it's after disappointment. And because we've repeated those conclusions often enough, they became our belief. And those beliefs fed our identity. And eventually we forgot they were just stories. And we called them reality. This is why I believe one of the most loving questions you can ever ask yourself is, what am I believing right now? Not what am I feeling? Yes, feelings matter. They absolutely matter. But feelings don't always tell us what's true. Sometimes they tell us what we've practiced. Sometimes they tell us what we fear. Sometimes they tell us what we've believed for 30 years. And sometimes those beliefs have absolutely nothing to do with what is spiritually true. Often said that awareness, when you get it, it's the first miracle. Not because awareness fixes anything, especially like overnight, but because awareness gives you back your freedom to choose. Imagine you've been driving down the same road every day for 20 years. One day someone points out that there's another road. You don't have to take it. Now you know it exists. And it might have beautiful scenery and it might get you there faster or slower or whatever your preference is. That's awareness. The old road is still there. It's familiar. It's comfortable. You know where it goes. You can do it unconsciously. How many of you have driven to work and when you got there, don't remember even driving? You went into an unconscious state. That's how ingrained these patterns are into our subconscious. Our subconscious got us there. It knows the way. But now we have a choice. A choice has now entered the picture, and sovereignty lives in that choice. every time, every day, every conversation, reaction, every decision, every opportunity. And maybe that's why I love the word practice. We practice yoga, we practice meditation, we practice prayer because none of us are graduating from being a human. We all have the old roads. None of us reaches a place where fear never whispers again. What if this road's not as good? What if this road leads us off a cliff? What if this road has a sinkhole? What if this road swallows us up, spits us out? None of us becomes so enlightened that life stops inviting us into a deeper awareness. We have to practice remembering and telling the truth and listening and returning again and again. That's the pattern. Maybe that's why I no longer judge myself when I noticed I've drifted. I used to think, Jenny, that again? Are we doing this again? You know better. Now I smile because I notice, and because I notice I'm awake. And if I'm awake, I'm aware and I can return. To me, that's what grace feels like. That's what self compassion feels like. That permission to return and just keep returning. I don't have to ask, how do I become sovereign? I just ask what helps me remember I already am. That's what prayer does, or meditation. It's often what journaling does. Certainly, what I do with my clients, I see them in their divinity, and I want them to see me in mine. But more so, my job is to hold them in their divinity until they remember it themselves, till they wake up one day and go, wow, that's who I am. You have to practice. Nature helps. Practice sitting in silence and stillness. Practice gratitude. They don't make you spiritual. They remind you that you already are a spiritual being. And maybe that's where the universal law becomes less of a philosophy and more a way of life. When I first started, I wanted to memorize all of them, and I started with 52, one a week, and went through the entire year studying a different universal law. And then I found that they started out with just 12. I wanted to know all the old new thought leaders that over a century ago were teaching some of these things. And I wanted to know these brilliant teachers who had spent their lives contemplating the nature of reality. But somewhere along the way, I realized that the universal laws aren't something we memorize. They're inviting us just to cooperate with them. Just as I don't have to understand every law of physics to enjoy flying in an airplane, I don't have to become a scholar to begin living in harmony with spiritual laws and universal laws. I just have to become aware of them. So I invite you to study up on that, right? If you continue to experience rejection, then ask yourself, where am I rejecting a part of who I am? If I continue to attract people who like to control me, where am I giving away my authority? If I'm continually struggling in lack, what story about abundance am I believing? Notice how empowering those questions are, not because they're comfortable, but because they return the power to where it has always belonged, and that is within. There's the law of vibration. Everything is energy. Everything, your thoughts, your emotion, your words, your expectations, your beliefs, they all carry a frequency. I know that law of vibration, it gets tossed around a lot these days. People are talking about raising your vibration. It gets a matter of thinking positive, and I don't believe that that's what it means. I think vibration is more deeper than an emotion. I think it's the energetic expression of consciousness. You can repeat affirmations all day. I'm abundant, I'm abundant, I'm abundant. But if deep within you, there's a terrified little girl who believes there will never be enough, Which vibration do you think life is going to respond to? The words or the consciousness beneath the words? That's why this work requires honesty and courage and compassion and awakening and awareness and being willing to take yourself and your ego, take it on. There are no victims here. That's liberating to me. But trust me, there are many people who would prefer to blame others. Doesn't make sense to me, but that's that's true. And I've had to let people be right where they are because they're so wedded to the victim stories that that's their comfort and it's familiar and it's what they need. And there's no right or wrong way on these spiritual journeys in this visit we have here on earth. But when you're willing to see what you've been carrying for your whole life, and when you are willing to quit covering fear with pretty words, then you are on a path of some serious growth. It's like your subconscious mind is roots of the tree. Nobody really sees the roots, but everyone sees the fruit. And when the fruit isn't what we hope for, most of us, we have to start polishing the apples or painting them or explaining them or comparing them instead of just asking the obvious question, well, how are the roots? Because healthy roots eventually produce healthy fruit. Consciousness is the root. The experience we're having is the fruit. Sovereignty is choosing to tend the roots. There's the law of polarity. This one becomes one of my favorites, not because I enjoy polarity. I don't. I don't wake up in the morning asking the universe for more opportunities to grow, but I've stopped assuming that difficulty means I've done something wrong and I get on with the growth. What's in me trying to emerge? What seed is about to sprout? Is it going to be a tree? If it is, it's got to split wide open. From the outside, if we didn't understand nature, we'd probably think the seed was dying, but it's cracking, it's breaking apart. Sometimes that's how I feel, losing the very form it once had. But that breaking, it isn't failure, it's transformation. And something happens. Sometimes the life we carefully built begins to crack. The career, the relationship, the identity, the role we've played, the house we've lived in, the life we're living, the season we're in. It's not meant to stay stagnant. And our first instinct is to glue it all back together and crawl back in the cocoon. Let's all get back to normal. But what if normal was the shell and life isn't trying to repair who you used to be? It's inviting you to discover who you've become, recognizing that who you've become is who you already were. Oh my goodness, it just goes round and round, doesn't it? Wow. Years later, you'll hear someone say, I finally found myself. No, you finally remembered who you are. It's amazing, this life of ours, right? And so I just want to wrap this up because I know I've taken a lot of your time today. And I just want to kind of revisit what in me is asking to become more conscious. If my principle is that every challenge contains an invitation, then I stop asking, why is this happening to me? And I begin saying, what is this making possible for me? The circumstances around me haven't changed, but I have. And that's sovereignty. Not changing the world overnight, changing my consciousness with which I meet the world. And I think that's why prayers become so different for me. I used to pray for circumstances to change, and now, more often than not, I pray for consciousness. I pray for eyes to see. I pray for courage to tell myself the truth. I pray for the willingness to release the beliefs that no longer serve me. I pray for wisdom. I pray to remember because honestly, I don't think God needs convinced. I think I do. And I think prayer has softened me and quieted the noise and reminded me of who I am when fear has temporarily convinced me otherwise. Maybe prayer has never been about changing God's mind, just changing mine. And that's why Jesus said the kingdom of God is within you. Maybe that's why every great spiritual teacher eventually points us inward. Not because the answers are hidden, because they've been there all along, covered over by fear, covered over by conditions and old stories and meaning we've placed on experiences, or the illusion that we've somehow become separated from the very presence that gave us life. Those illusions lose their power the moment we see them for what they are. And that brings us back to where we started. We didn't come here to become sovereign. I think we're here to remember that we belong, that we are loved, that we are creative, that we are connected, and that truth has never stopped being true simply because we forgot it for a little while. And my friends, that's the beautiful thing about truth. It waits patiently and lovingly. It doesn't shame us for wandering away. It simply welcomes us home again and again and again. So the next time you notice yourself people pleasing, avoiding conflict, trying to control everyone around you, n- the next time you notice yourself abandoning your own knowing because you're afraid someone won't approve, pause. Not to criticize yourself or become guilty or go into shame, simply ask, what truth have I forgotten? And return to your principles, return to prayer, return to that inner knowing, return to source. Because sovereignty, it isn't a destination. It's not something you achieve once and then you never think about it again. It's a way of living, a way of choosing, a way of remembering, one conscious choice at a time. So I just want to thank you for walking this long journey into sovereignty with me over these last 9 episodes. And my hope has never been that you would become someone different. My hope has been that you would remember the extraordinary woman or man you've always been beneath your fear or conditioning or stories and the illusion of separation. May you walk gently. May you walk consciously. May you trust deeply. May you love courageously. And when you forget, as we all do, may you remember that home has never been somewhere else. Home has always been within you. Until next time, with love, take care.